Hi, this is Cathy Goodwin. I thought I'd make a really quick video today about personal stories versus relatable stories, and I'll explain why. A lot of people will tell you that in order to be successful, a story has to be personal, but I am going to suggest that it's not about being personal, it's being about relatable. Recently, I was reading at some example called Stories for Work by Gabrielle Dolan. And she had a story about being on an airplane. As usual, when the crew gives their announcements about fasten your seatbelts and here's what to do, here's where the doors are, here are the emergency exits, people kind of sleep through it. Then this woman was listening to the announcements and dozing off. As the flight got underway, it looked like they were going to have to make an emergency landing. And the crew said, "We're going to redo the emergency instructions." And this time, everybody was riveted on the edge of their seats, listening to every single word. The story was told to a bunch of people in a business setting who were going to have a major shift in company policy. They were going to see major changes in the way they did their work. And this was a way to get their attention by telling a story that showed when people are really interested in an outcome, they will pay attention. So it was important for the managers to explain to their people what was going to happen and make sure that they were paying attention. In the book, Gabrielle Dolan said, well, the reason the story works is that it's personal. But I don't think it works for that reason. I think it's relatable because almost everyone, as you're listening, you're hearing the flight announcement, you imagine yourself being crammed into a miserable little coach seat, and the announcement comes on, exits are over here, lights are on the floor, all those things that nobody really pays attention to. So I think people could relate to that story. The fact that it was personal was an extra bonus. It was personal and it was relatable. But then I have a story that I've told. In fact, when I was doing comedy, someone said, you ought to have a story about your experience living in Alaska. So I told a story about how I was flying with a colleague who wanted to earn extra hours in a Cessna. That's a very small plane, if you don't know. It's like a 2-seater, maybe a 4-seater in some models, but it's tiny. And we were flying through the mountains. And as we were going through the mountains, the plane starts to shake and vibrate from side to side. And my colleague who's flying the plane, who had less than 100 hours of flight time, said, you know, Alaska's a really good place to learn mountain flying. And I decided I would not say a word. I wanted to get home, and we did. And obviously we were fine. We never crashed, or I would not be talking to you today. And let's compare this to another story. I got an email from someone who was a business coach who wrote about how she had visited an exotic resort in Bali. It was about yoga and getting peaceful and learning to reorient her mind, and it was a very meaningful experience. And these stories are personal, but they're just not relatable to most audiences. When I've told the story about flying through the Alaska mountains, I have to say people just tuned out. When I was doing this on stage in comedy, they just looked at me in an odd way. When I told a story about Comcast, they were like, yes, we get that, because we've all had occasions to fight about our cable service. But a lot of people did not know what a Cessna was, a small plane. They'd certainly never been in one. They had not been to Alaska. They had not flown through the mountains. And they certainly weren't dumb enough to go out with someone who had less than 100 hours of flight experience. So that story was completely unrelatable to them. And the exotic resort might be relatable to some people, but to a lot of people, it's like, that's nice for you, but I can't even imagine what it would be like to go there. I've never been a spa kind of person, and if I had, I'm not sure. I've never been to Bali. So those stories are personal, but not relatable, and they don't do as well. And then there's a story one of the marketing coaches likes to tell. The story is like this. It's a concept story. It's about a woman who's driving home late at night, and it's cold and it's snowing and the weather conditions are bad and it's really dark, and she's exhausted from a busy day, and she's got to get home to her family and kids, and all she can think about is getting home and having a hot bath and eating a really nice dinner. And then she gets a flat tire. She looks in the trunk and her spare is gone, and she doesn't have the equipment to change the tire. She's stranded by the side of the road, and along comes someone in a truck who says, I can help you with that. And the question is, how much would this woman pay to have this guy help her get out of this mess and go home? The story really is intended to illustrate the point that this is the level of desperation, of eagerness that you want to get from your clients. Whether you agree with that sentiment or not, that's a very vivid story and a very good way of explaining how if clients really want something, they'll pay a lot to get it and they'll value what you give them. This is not a personal story, but it's relatable. Everyone can remember being outside and driving, and maybe you had a flat tire and you had to wait for a tow truck, and even if it wasn't cold and miserable, you can imagine what it would be like. You've probably been there. Or you've been out driving and you had a flat and you panicked and you thought, what if I can't fix it? What if nobody comes? What if AAA never shows up? So it's a very relatable story, and people can imagine themselves in that situation. Now, suppose you tell a story about someone who won the lottery, and that's the story. They won the lottery, they did this, they did that, they had a really good time. Or maybe they won the lottery and then they lost everything because they couldn't deal with being rich. Or maybe you tell a story, as I did one time when I was writing something up, because I knew people who had been in the military and gone to the service academies. And so I told a story about a female service academy cadet. My audience could not relate because they did not know anyone who had been to the service academies. They didn't know anyone in the military. It was that type of audience. And they looked at me blankly. So these are stories that are not personal, and they're also not relatable to many audiences. And again, a lot depends on your audience. You have to choose your audience and pick a story that they can relate to. And it won't all be the same. Some audiences would have loved a story about a service academy, and some people would relate to a story about winning the lottery. You have to match story to audience to be relatable. If you want to learn more, I have this ebook, 3 Story Mistakes Most Business Owners Make, and it's available at this address, mycopy.info/3 story mistakes. And then if you'd like to talk further about stories, about copywriting, about your business, how to make your copy more conversational, we can do that in a consultation. mycopy.info/cc will take you to that page where you can have 90 minutes of my time uninterrupted. We focus on your challenge, and people have said these sessions have totally transformed their marketing after just one call. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again on a future video or perhaps a consultation.